On a quiet administrative morning in Kolkata, something unusual happened. The Chief Minister of West Bengal quietly took control of the law and judicial departments. Not finance, not home affairs, the department that decides how the state fights its legal battles. And suddenly, a question began circulating across political and legal circles. Why would a chief minister personally take charge of the state's law machinery? Because in politics, controlling the law department often means controlling the legal battlefield. And that battlefield in Bengal has been heating up. At the heart of the story is a classic democratic tension. Political power versus legal power. On one side is the elected state government led by Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. On the other side, there are institutions that constantly challenge governments in court. Investigative agencies, opposition parties, constitutional courts. In India's federal structure, the law department of a state government plays a critical role. It is the department that drafts legislations, manages government litigation, decides legal strategy in court battles, interprets judicial orders before the government acts. So when a chief minister takes that department into her own hands, it raises a deeper institutional question. Is this simply an administrative reshuffle or a strategic consolidation of legal power? Every week on News in Law, we track the biggest legal developments through our short form content. Last week, some major headlines included Indian refiners buying Russian oil cargoes after a US sanctions waiver, India and Israel signing a new arbitration corporation agreement, the RBI tightening dividend rules for the banks, and the Supreme Court pushing for a law on passive euthanasia. These are legal power shifts we track every week. And remember, the story that receives the most engagement on our short form content becomes the weekly deep dive. So if you want a particular legal story analyzed next week, engage with the short form content. Like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this week the story that caught your attention most was this one. West Bengal's chief minister taking direct control of the state's law and judicial departments, which raises a deeper question. What changes when political power takes charge of the state's legal machinery? Until recently, the law department of the West Bengal government was being handled by Senior Minister Shri Molloy Ghatak. Then suddenly, the state government issued a notification. The portfolios were reshuffled. Shri Molloy Ghatak would now continue as Labour Minister, but the law department would now be handled directly by the Chief Minister herself. Administrative reshuffles are common in Indian politics, but this one caught attention for two reasons. First, it comes at a time when multiple political and administrative decisions in Bengal are facing legal scrutiny. Second, it comes in the middle of an increasing intense legal confrontation between state governments and central investigative agencies. In such moments, legal strategy becomes just as important as political strategy, which is why the control over the law department suddenly becomes far more significant than it sounds. To understand the real significance of this move, you need to understand what the law department actually does. In every state government, the law department acts as the legal brain of the administration. It decides how the government responds to court orders, which cases to appeal, how to defend government policies in court, how new laws should be drafted and interpreted. In other words, it is the bridge between politics and the judiciary. So when the chief minister directly controls that department, something important happens. The government's legal strategy becomes centralized at the very top of the political leadership. This means Decisions about litigation, constitutional interpretation, and court battles can move faster and more strategically. But it also raises a sensitive democratic question. Should legal decision-making remain institutionally distributed, or should it be politically centralized during high-stake conflict? Let's look at the two competing perspectives. Side 1, administrative control. Supporters argue this move is simply about efficiency and accountability. When legal battles intensify, governments need direct political oversight. By taking charge of the law department, the chief minister can streamline litigation decisions, coordinate with the government lawyers, respond quickly to court orders. In this view, the move strengthens governance. Side 2, concentration of legal power. Critics see something different. They argue that concentrating control of the law department in the hands of the chief minister risks politicizing legal decision-making, because the same office that makes policy would also control how the policy is defended legally. In democratic systems, critics say legal strategy should ideally remain somewhat insulated from political concentration. This is why the debate around this reshuffle has quickly moved beyond administration into questions about institutional balance. This decision may sound like an internal government matter, but it could influence several real-world areas. For example, government litigation. The state government is involved in hundreds of ongoing cases. Legal strategy for these cases could now be decided directly by the chief minister's office. Policy defenses. Major policies from recruiting decisions to welfare schemes often face court challenges. A centralized legal department could shape how aggressively these policies are defended. Federal tensions. In India's federal structure, disputes between the state government and the central institutions frequently end up in court. Who controls the state's legal response can influence those battles. In other words, this administrative decisions quietly affects how power is negotiated through law. So, the real question going forward is not about cabinet reshuffle. It is about institutional design. When legal conflicts intensify in democracy, should governments centralize the legal control to defend themselves more effectively? Or should legal decisions remain institutionally distributed to preserve checks and balances? Because sometimes the most important legal battles are not fought inside the courtrooms. They begin in the structure of the government itself. At the start of this story, we saw a chief minister taking charge of a department. On paper, it looked like a routine administrative change, but behind that decision lies a deeper reality. In modern politics, power is rarely exercised through elections or speeches. Increasingly, power is exercised through law, through litigation, legal interpretation, and courtroom strategy. And whoever controls that legal machinery often shapes how political battles are ultimately resolved. This wasn't just a headline. This is how law quietly reshapes power. This is News in Law.